Sushumna Kannan has a PhD in Cultural Studies from Center for the Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore, India. Her research on the South Asian devotional traditions and feminist epistemology focused on the medieval mystic Akka Mahadevi and her Vachanas. She received the Bourse Mira French Research Fellowship in 2006-7, if I pronounced that right, and Sir Ratan Tata Fellowship for PhD coursework and writing in 2003 and 7. She's published some of her research work on Bhakti and Dharmashastras and has an essay on translation theory. She's completed a book project on Hinduism, violence and non-violence, and is currently working on a translation of Yoganga Trividhi by Akka Mahadevi and on a research project on the position of women in the Manusmriti. For her writings, you can visit sushumnakannan.weebly.com. Now, over to you, Sushumna ji. 30 minutes.
Thank you. My paper is more about ethics, less about jurisprudence, very tangentially connected to jurisprudence. So I'm going to read from a paper. I hope I keep to the time. In order to study the position of women in Dharma texts, I began to work towards a theorization of the genre of Dharma texts. This meant asking the question, what are the Dharma texts trying to achieve? One simple answer found within the Dharma texts is that they elucidate the duties of the four castes, the ascetics, and women across ashramas. But a delineation of Varnasrama Dharma raises the further question, what is achieved by following Varnasrama Dharma? Or how is Dharma, with its connotations of nature, upholding, and ethics, followed by following Varnasrama Dharma? A more complex answer in the Dharma text suggests that dharmic living, Varnasrama Dharma, following duties, ensures great benefits in this and other worlds. We cannot yet address the other worlds aspect, except perhaps phenomenologically. But we can ask what the content of dharmic living is and how it benefits this world. However, the content of dharmic living is not obvious since the term dharma has numerous meanings and usages. How is the meaning of dharma to be determined then? Scholars have attempted to answer this question by engaging with the various elucidations of dharma found in Hindu thought, not restricting themselves to the Dharmashastras. Among numerous such attempts, important landmarks in the field relevant to our discussion are Paul Horsch's essay, Olivale and Richard Larry Weir's essay on Dharmashastra custom and real law, and also Wessler's essay, which argues that Dharma in the Veda and the Dharmashastras are different from one another. The proposed discontinuity in the Dharma of the Veda and the Dharma of the Dharma texts is further attributed to a process of Brahminification by Wessler and concretized in the theory of the Dharma texts as propagandists of elitist ideology proposed by Lubin 2012 and Actor 2012, which finds endorsement later on in numerous other scholars. Hence the importance of examining this strand of scholarship. I'm just going to touch upon the disagreements that I have with some of the work here to save time. Hacker explains the importance of orienting towards Veda as seen in the Dharma text, but his suggestion that Dharma cannot be derived from any philosophical principle makes way for future arguments that the Dharma of the Veda and the Dharma of the Dharma texts are different. To the contrary, the principle of Dharma, I shall argue shortly, is encased in the Vedic sacrifices ethic of give and take. This is true even though Dharma is never immediately apparent or straightforward in concrete life situations. If we view peaceful coexistence, non-violence, filial piety, ethics, and the lack of selfish motivations as Samanya Dharma, features Hacker himself identifies, then starting with the Chandogya Upanishad 3.17.4 and later on in the yogic manuals and the Dharma texts, there are lists of virtues that succinctly capture dharmic behavior thus: self-restraint, non-violence, uprightness, and truth-telling. Dharma's complexity, of course, comes from adrishta, unseen fruits of our actions, which could be understood cosmically or socially. That is, we cannot grasp the full implications of our actions as it affects all our fellow beings. And then, of course, there is a regional, temporal, and circumstantial differences that one must honor before figuring the dharma for a specific situation or subjectivity, that is swadharma. Hosh recognizes the presence of dharma in the ethical sense in the Rig Veda, and unlike Hacker, he sees a shifting development from the cosmic to the ethical sense of dharma, but it is still mythical. Hosh suggests that dharma has an analogous relationship with truth in the Vedas, but both Hacker and Hosh do not fully account for the role of Vedic ritual in dharma. And although Hosh does contextualize the Varnasrama Dharma better than Hacker, much remains to be said about how Varnasrama Dharma is dharma, that is ethical. The distinction between dharma in Veda and elsewhere in Hinduism and a change of meaning from the cosmic to the ethical sense of dharma, I believe, is picked up by Wessler in a big way, which in turn prompts Patrick Olivell's semantic study of dharma. I won't go into this much because Meg has an essay on it, several essays actually. But it's one of the noticeable flaws in Olivell's work is that he denies that the Vedic deities have anything to do with ethical attributes. But in reality, you could find numerous examples that the deities are being ethical in what they are doing. So in many ways, the shift between the dharma of the Vedas and the dharma of the Dharma texts is trivially true. The Dharma texts are created by seers who extract dharma from the Vedas, while the Vedas are revelation recorded by the seers. One is Smriti and could be flawed, the other is Shruti, considered flawless. The shift in the two dharmas offers a sense of development and evolution in Hindu thought that serves the purposes of history writing. But this is more a change in form than in content. In fact, there is a seamlessness and coexistence between the two dharmas within the Vedas itself. The root of such differentiation between the Vedas and other Hindu texts go back to early Indological scholars such as H.H. Wilson, resulting in modern nomenclature Vedism or Vedic Hinduism. Next, Larry Weir's point that Dharma literature is likely a record of custom obfuscated by the fact of the idiom of eternality and timelessness that is attached to it could be met with a counter-argument such as this. Eternality and timelessness claims of the Vedas cannot be taken literally. The Vedas are making no effort to hide their historicity. There is a sense of before and after and movement of time within them. There is time consciousness. So the eternality claim has to do with something else. Perhaps Zimmerman's reading of Ayurveda is useful to understand this. Zimmerman shows that Ayurveda takes into account the basic qualities of the world, like dryness and unctuosity, caused by eternals such as the sun, moon, and stars, while also being alert to regional differences such as arid lands, jungles marked by the black buck, and rivers, and individual processing of food, which is samskara. More eternal and unchanging aspects can be found in the discourse of the self in the Upanishads, which is based on the basic and common attributes of all living beings, such as bodily states, nature of the senses, breath, life, sleep, life and death, sleep, dreams, and so on. As also in the understanding of Satya or truth, a term which often captures the basic essence of all living beings. Such notions of the eternal also form the ethical ground based on which the idea that all living beings are alike and interconnected is often made in Hindu thought. Proposing that custom and not the pious fiction of the Vedas was the basis for Dharma texts has many drawbacks. And then Wessler argues that there is a difference between the Dharma of the Vedas and the Dharma of the Dharma texts. because there is no ritual instruction in the Dharma texts. This can hardly be a criteria to make such arguments. So to continue, Wessler emphasizes the empirical character not only of the Vyavahara, but also of Dharma as such. These can be better understood if we understood the nature of the 3 to 5 rinas that everyone owes as per the Vedas. Thus, we should be able to reconcile being dharmic and being transactional and their empiricality. This focus on right transactions is what makes the Dharma text a great resource for formulating laws in the modern world, I think. So it has to be a project, it has to be a separate project. I don't think that Dharma is easily translatable as law. Finally, why would Smriti and Achara or custom both be listed as sources of Dharma separately in the Dharma texts if Achara was the basis of Dharma, like Wessler argues? Wessler's arguments that the Dharma of the Veda and the Dharma of the Dharmashastras are different and based on custom and codification are not entirely convincing and are somewhat trivially true, because every kind of ethics can be considered as custom with the passing of time. I have a little bit to say on custom. It will depend on whether I have time. It's also 4:30 a.m. in the morning here, so I hope I'm reading in a way that it's even understandable. To summarize, scholars working on Dharma and the Dharma texts have not discussed and elucidated the Vedic sacrifice at length, although acknowledging it as a quintessential aspect of Vedic ethics. They have failed to notice or have insufficiently explained the Varnasrama Dharma's importance to the Dharma of the Dharma texts, or have noticed its importance but have not accounted for it. As a result of the above two, scholars have thought that custom might as well be the source of Dharma in the Dharma texts. In order to explain how the Dharma of the Vedas and the Dharma of the Dharma texts are disparate, they propose a role for Brahmins who apparently distort the Dharma texts due to personal motivation, leading to the theory that the Dharma texts propagate elitism. I will now focus on the Vedic sacrifice to show how it can be viewed as related to the Dharma of the Dharma texts, and then take up Varnasrama Dharma to show how it must be viewed to be understood as dharmic. So I'm drawing on the work of several scholars here, like Raimondo Panikkar, Stoll, and Lorenz Minima. The Vedic sacrifice offers a prototype for human action. Being a debt-negating act, the 5 to 7 rinas that I spoke about, it demonstrates the contours of proper transaction. It shows that sustenance or dharma occurs when we take as well as give. There is an underlying environmental ethic here. The Vedic sacrifice teaches us an attitude of not taking anything for granted, especially what the earth and other natural resources provide us, and teaches how to be in this world in a non-violent way and what relationship to have with it. The Vedic sacrifice is thus duty. It sustains and upholds oneself and others. Since there is in truth no difference between the sustenance one requires and others require, living beings as we all are, sacrifice is also unmotivated action. That is, sacrifice is a dharmic act, a primordial sustaining act that must be performed without motivation. The principle of giving and taking extends and expands to everyday life so that every action becomes sacrifice-like if done without selfish motives. This is in the Dharma texts. Such actions uphold and sustain everyone, and when go unperformed lead to destruction. This is how proper Vyavahara becomes important in the Dharma texts, I think. Vyavahara finds lengthy treatment in the Dharmashastras, with some Dharma texts dedicated solely to it. It is small wonder too that debt is given a significant amount of space within the Dharma texts, sometimes an entire chapter. The sections on Vyavahara might at face value appear secular and disjointed from Dharma and ethics, having a law-like appearance, But we need only to remind ourselves of the give and take that the Vedic sacrifices emphasize upon to understand why the sections on debt too are related to ethics and righteous action. After all, the word for debt is rina. Its continuity in the ethics of the Dharma text is unsurprising. Now I move to Varnasrama Dharma and ask the question, so how then does Varnasrama Dharma also count as Dharma? I'm not aware of many attempts to answer this question directly, but as mentioned above, Horsch does notice a movement of the Dharma of the Vedas becoming a duty of the individual person. That there is interdependence and complementarity among the castes is generally acknowledged in the work of Bhugle, Nadakarni, and Lingat. But how is this interdependence Dharma? It is if we acknowledge that each caste does as duty, that what each caste does as duty is in its bare bones versions an act of giving. The description of each caste's duties as duties renders this aspect somewhat opaque. But if we view each caste as giving when they perform their duties, then we can see a connection between the Vedic sacrifices and the Varnasrama Dharma. That is, some castes give knowledge or digest the impurities of others' ritual mistakes, some give protection, others provide goods, and yet others offer services. But each caste is also being altruistic in some form when it performs its duties, even though its actions are defined as duties. In one sense, they are indeed merely duties, but they're also altruistic because they require some sacrifices. So what I'm saying is that they're merely duties when we think of Dharma as debt-canceling actions, but they're altruistic when we think of Dharma as sustaining oneself and others, and therefore accruing merit as well. Caste duties could be said to be inherently altruistic in the following way. A Brahmin must give up the accumulation of wealth. A Kshatriya must give up life when necessary. A Vaishya is likely to be obligated to travel to produce goods. A Shudra must offer services. It is wise to remember here that there were some changes to the original definition of duties by the time of Manusmriti itself, owing to the inability to survive properly on strict definitions of occupations and duties. Horsch notices a development in Varnasrama Dharma thus. Later specific rights are added to duties which correspond to the castes. So if the actions they were doing were called as duties, later on a notion of rights developed. The rights can be identified thus. Brahmins acquire respect, gifts, protection of property and life. Kshatriyas enjoy wealth. Vaishyas enjoy profit, and Shudras receive payments. Women cannot be killed, they must be protected and honored in return for their services. Ascetics must at least be fed. Horsch captures aspects of the caste system well when he says that adharma is understood as occurring when only the rights prevail. Thus, the debts that the Vedic sacrifices aim to pay off are directly performed as actions in the Varnasrama Dharma of the Dharma texts. And just as not paying debts results in cosmic imbalance, not performing duties as per the Varnasrama Dharma also results in cosmic imbalance. That is, the transactional nature of the Vedic sacrifice is preserved in the structure and content of the Varnasrama Dharma. If we take the Vedas as texts where the gods are showing us how to act, then Varnasrama Dharma in the Dharma texts preserves and extends their logic to all actions. In some sense, thus we could say that the foundation for the caste system is present in the Vedas, more overtly in the Purusha Sukta, of course, but covertly in the Vedic sacrifice. Thus, we could conclude that the Vedas are the sources of the notions of Dharma and Varnasrama Dharma in the Dharma texts. And the Dharma of the Vedas and the Dharma texts, and the Dharma of the Vedas and the Dharma of the Dharma texts cannot be dissociated. The understanding of rights and duties herein also makes Hindu thought a resource for formulating laws in the modern world. How much time do I have?
5 minutes more.
Okay, I have a bit here to say about customs and why customs are endorsed as more important than the Vedas in some Dharma texts, and as less important as the when compared to the Vedas in some other Dharma texts. I explain this difference in the Dharma texts by saying that this could be caused because of the Vedic shakhas and how the Vedas are followed. And I also think that custom lies in how in the finer details of how a transaction is settled, and that because customs are practices that put Vedic principles into practice and keep them alive, sometimes they capture the wisdom of the Vedas more succinctly and are more important than the Vedic principle itself. But at other times, that might not be happening, and the converse might be happening. In which case, the Vedic principle becomes more important, and because the custom is missing the point after a point of time. So in this way, the apparent contradiction in the Dharma texts, which uphold custom once or Vedas at another time, can be explained. I'll stop here and take questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kannan. Questions?
There was a comment from Indrani Ramprasad, I think, why there is so much of reference to the Western scholars on Dharma, while we could have discussed everything without their names.
Yeah, I have no problem in reading secondary scholarship and trying to understand the efforts made by Western scholars. I don't distinguish in that way between Western and Indian scholars. It's always useful to read the work that others are doing. This paper did not focus on a primary text, and that's the reason why it focused on how the question of dharma has been addressed so far within scholarship, and it's important to build on what scholarship has done so far. It's easier that way for us to move forward. So I don't see it as a problem to be quoting from Western scholars. What I just did was, I think, a clarificatory exercise. So there are agreements with some of these scholars, there are disagreements, and then there is built upon these findings, there is a new suggestion. So yeah, so when you're not dealing with a primary text, with a primary source and elucidating stuff from that, but instead are building on the work that has already been done, because Paul Hacker's essay is a survey of dharma across the entirety of Hinduism. So he's saying so many important things that that we would even agree with and find to be interesting. So I guess, yeah, that would be my answer.
I answered that question in the chat box by saying our audience are modern readers of such literature, so we are compelled to connect our discourse to the existing body of knowledge. That body is, for good or bad, filled with their writings. And another statement I made in the chat box is she quotes them to show how and why she differs with them also. Quite often there was a mention of how Dr. Kannan was saying that she differs with their view. Basically, one central focus was on the difference between the Dharma of the Vedas and the Dharma of the Dharmashastras. There, she quoted how the Western scholars were saying that they are two completely different things. And she went on arguing how they are not so different as they show. Though she showed how, yes, the difference exists, but there is a way to connect these two also. And she was able to show that connection, is what I observed. Dr. Kannan, did I represent you correctly?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. So I don't think there are any more questions.
Yeah. I
I
think
did not
that
suggest
brings us.
Indrani ji is saying, I did not suggest to exclude the Western scholars, but the title should state that why not use indigenous scholars as well in conjunction with foreign scholars.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Suggestion taken.
Yeah, okay.